Hey church, my name is Evan Kirkland and I'm the associate pastor here at Southside, and I'm here with Pastor Brian. We're just discussing a deep dive into yesterday's sermon, and we talked about, Pastor Brian's topic was redemptive brokenness, and we were going over Genesis chapter 32. And a quick recap, Brian, as we talk about it today, we're talking about Jacob and him wrestling with God. And so we see that Jacob is on his way to face Esau, his brother, and after many years of hurt and he's been in a distant land, he's in an intense moment, and he begs God to help him, and he's wrestling with God. And so he comes away from that moment, and Brian, I'm sure you got some thoughts. But he comes away from that moment forever changed in that interaction with God. And so, as you explained yesterday, there's some things that didn't make it into the sermon that you kind of want to go a little bit deeper into. And so, what didn't make it into the sermon, Pastor Brian?
Well, a couple of things. One is that I did talk about the fact that the hip socket being the strongest socket, or one of the strongest in the body, and how that kind of symbolizes how God deals with us in our strengths.
Yeah.
What I didn't kind of go into is that the enemy, and our enemy as Christians, is both our fallen human nature that is prone to certain tendencies that we all have. We all have certain weaknesses in our life. And our enemy is our fallen human nature. And of course, the spiritual warfare, the devil and his emissaries that are always at work in the world we live in. When you look at the Bible, the enemy tends to attack us in our weaknesses.
Yeah.
And we're familiar with that just in human life, period, because we see where people fell at is usually in their weaknesses, whether it's sexual or money or pleasure or materialism. But God tends to deal with us in our strengths. Yeah. And I think about even like the Apostle Paul, where he talked about in, I believe it's 2 Corinthians 12, and he talks about how that there was given to me a thorn in the flesh.
Yeah.
But before saying that, he talks about all the things God had given him the strength and the ability to do. Preaching, revelation, called up to the third heaven, and all these miraculous things. These were strengths. These were really supernatural strengths that God gave him. And so when God sought to, and Paul himself admits that he gave me this thorn in the flesh, I asked God for 3 times to take it away. He did not do so. And he is making the point that in the place of his strength, God gave him that. He said, lest I be exalted above measure. The enemy goes after our weaknesses, and that's what we see displayed. God goes deeper.
Yeah.
He goes after our strengths.
Right.
Because when he deals with our strengths, he reminds us, one is our strengths come from him. He also reminds us how feeble and weak we are. It's just interesting to me that we want to, sometimes when it comes to God, when God is actually, as he did with Jacob, wounding us in the area of our strength, we want to attribute that to the devil.
Yeah.
And we know things like lust and lying and all the things that are our weaknesses. We know those are evil. But what makes our strength is our strengths may not be evil or bad, but God deals with us in those areas to keep it pure, to keep his redemptive purpose going.
Right.
And the second thing that was it clear enough on that, you think? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, good.
The second thing that I did not deal with a lot about, at least in the practical sense, is that towards the end of the message I was talking about that when Jacob walked away, he forever limped.
Yeah.
And that limp was with him the rest of his life. And because a lot of times we'll say, God heals us of our wounds. And he does.
Yeah.
He does heal us of our wounds. No doubt about that. But there are some wounds and some limps will never be healed of this side of heaven, and probably should not be.
Right.
I mean, you think in terms of in our own church family, friends and family members that their mate has died, and their lifelong partner, and that's a wound. I mean, we know where they're at. To be absent from the body, to be present with the Lord, but it still leaves a wound.
Yeah.
And there's certain things that happen, even things prior to coming to know Jesus. God has forgiven me of those, and many of those wounds He's healed. Some may not ever be fully formulated, healed, brought to fulfillment until heaven.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes God leaves certain wounds within us because we need them.
Right.
That, and again, going back to what I said about Paul a moment ago, pray 3 times that his thorn would be removed.
Yeah.
And God didn't answer him.
Right.
But he says that what God did say to him is, my grace is sufficient.
Right.
I mean, that dear man or woman that has buried their loved one, that's a grief and a wound.
Right.
They'll feel, and God gives the grace to move on, but it's still there, and but that's a wound that probably should never heal, because those are things that there's just things God does in our life that He totally takes away. They're totally healed. Some things He leaves there so that we depend on His grace to help us walk through that.
Right. And I think that's a struggle for, especially me, but I think anybody, who really trusts in Jesus, they all have certain things that they're dealing with.
Absolutely.
And continue to deal with. As we look more into the sermon and we look at Jacob and his situation in chapter 32, why do you think that Jacob wrestling with God connects with a lot of people, like concerning that situation?
I think it's because we all wrestle. I mean, we somehow or another want to try to make the Bible characters out to be these super saints.
Yeah. Yeah.
We kind of elevate them. Proximity causes us to look at them different. Distance from
Culture.
them. Culture. But man, these were people that asked questions, that struggled.
Yeah.
And Jacob had his demons.
Yeah.
I mean, there was things in Jacob's life that shouldn't have been there, like there is in all of our lives. And I think the reason it resonates with us is we struggle. Like one of the things I said yesterday is that I think sometimes the reason that we wrestle in that first point is because we wrestle with questions and doubts. And to say we don't is just not reality.
Right.
I think you can have faith and doubt on the same page. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is, my faith is in Jesus Christ. He saved me. He is my Lord and Savior. But something happens in my life, and whereas with Jacob, my brother who said he's going to kill me, he's coming with 400 men.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden doubts, and because as he begins to process that earlier in chapter 32, he talks about the fact that he's talking to God and saying, you gave me these promises of what you're going to do, make me a great nation, the ultimate seed, Jesus, which he didn't fully understand, coming into the world. How can you allow him to kill me?
Right.
And he's dealing with
Yeah.
doubts and struggles,
Right.
and questions.
And in that moment of doubt and struggle, what he remembers is that promise.
Yeah.
He remembers, he goes back to the promise. You said this.
Right. And I think it's one thing that we live on the promise, but we struggle with the present doubt.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
That's each one of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I just I like the fact that God doesn't just meet us in our weakness. He's always there, but He confronts us in our strength. He confronts us in our strength because He wants us to rely fully on Him.
Yeah.
And as we're reading this story, we see ourselves in this, and God is just saying, hey, rely on me. Rely on me. And a lot of the time we read this story like we're the ones who got us in this situation.
Yeah.
But God's the one who always gets us out.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So another question. What are some strengths that we can, as followers of Christ, that we can quietly become things that we rely on other than God?
Reframe that again.
So like, what are some strengths that as the everyday Christian that we can, that quietly creep in the door that we rely on, like other than God, especially in our culture?
That become strengths that can become weaknesses.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So I think a lot about, Bible knowledge. And Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians chapter 8 that knowledge puffs up. We need the knowledge of God to grow spiritually, but God, and that's what God, even with Jacob in wrestling, is that we need the knowledge of God to grow spiritually, growing in grace and knowledge. But God doesn't want us to have academic knowledge. He wants us to have experiential knowledge.
Yeah.
Jacob had a certain level of academic knowledge, but he needed that experiential knowledge of wrestling it through, making it real in his life. Bible knowledge, things about God that we know, that we can go to in Scripture. These are our strengths, but they can also inflate us to think we're something more than we are.
Right.
And we have to. And it's crazy to think of it that way. That the very word of God that we need, we can religiously make it an idol that can destroy us.
Yeah.
Because we think we're better or stronger than we are.
Right. And I think that's why God, whenever He meets us in our strength, that He causes us to have that limp. Like He allows us to have that limp. So that we're, one thing we remember, like that moment that He met us, but that we always have to rely on Him after the fact.
Yeah, 100%.
So my second question or third question, what do you think a redemptive limp looks like in an everyday life?
I think it can look different for everyone.
Right.
So, maybe just kind of step back just a little bit about what is brokenness for just a moment. A lot of times in our concept, we think of brokenness as someone maybe being a success in this area of life, and God just takes it all away, and they come to know Jesus, and that's brokenness, and it is.
Yeah.
Or bad choices. And truth is, God uses our bad choices to bring us to Himself in His grace, love, and mercy. You just looking at brokenness itself in light of redemptive love, there is a brokenness we bring on ourselves. There's brokenness that happens to us because we live in this fallen, broken world. And then there is that redemptive brokenness. And redemptive brokenness is what God does in us.
Right.
Not necessarily what God does to us, but what God does in us. I don't mean that God doesn't do things to us in our world.
Yeah.
That what I think it looks like is what is God done in my life?
Right.
What is God doing in my life that I can take back that, God broke me to bring me to a place to see without Him I'm nothing.
Right.
And
the promise is that even though like there is a limp, the limp leads ultimately to redemption.
Right.
Like when we see...
Well, it should.
It should.
Yes.
It should. But in Genesis 32, at the end, where we see in the following chapter, we see that Jacob and Esau reunite, and God worked it out.
Right.
God worked it out.
Right.
And every story in our lives is a little bit different, but the ultimate redemption, that as we pursue Christ, God will come for us one day as we look into the future.
100%. And here's the thing too about with that story in Genesis 32 is that Jacob is in the will of God going back home.
Right.
Because God told him to go back home.
Right.
You read earlier, God basically said it's time to go back home. And so he's in the will of God going back home.
Yeah.
And all of this wrestling and woundedness was in the will of God.
In the will of God.
And
that's the key. That's the key phrase there.
Yeah,
that's
it is.
The key phrase.
It is.
And so, as everybody who's watching, they're all going through a certain situation where they're wrestling with God. They're either running away, trying to get away from the wrestling, or they're in the middle of it. And he's working on them right now. So, as we close out with just these last few closing questions, I would just ask you listeners, what might God be touching in your strength right now? What's something that you are dealing with that God is trying to get you to see that He wants you to rely on solely His strength? And so, Pastor Brian, you got anything else that you want to say?
Well, the only thing I would say is that from a human standpoint of view, I'm not even sure that Jacob understood it all.
Yeah.
I mean, what I mean, to be able to put it in rational terms. Right. But what he did name the place was, I saw God face to face. To put it in modern day vernacular, God did something in my life.
Yeah.
And I think there's moments in our lives that whether we call them wrestling or whether we call whatever we call it, the different terms, that we know God's done something in our lives. And so what he did walk away from, he walked away with a limp, but he walked away with his heart focused on the Lord.
Right.
And you look at the rest of his life, it forever changed the trajectory of his life.
Yeah. And even though Jacob walks away limping, he walks away with God.
Absolutely.
He walks away with God.
Absolutely.
And so that's
100%.
That's the moral of the story whenever we're going through things.
And just like Jacob, there's going to be seasons in our lives that we don't have all the answers to.
Right.
And the questions are still going to remain, and we're going to find ourselves saying, that still don't make sense, but my hope's in the Lord.
Right.
My trust is in the Lord.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So I have one last thought. Redemptive brokenness isn't the end of the story. It's the turning point. It's that moment where God intervenes and He changes the direction of your life. And that's what we're here about at Southside. We want God to move in our lives, for Him to transform us, renew our hearts, renew our minds. And if you like this video, would you share it and send it to somebody that you care about? And Brian, thank you for diving deeper with us today. And we hope to see you guys soon.